The whole issue is from the beginning of this, she didn't ask me if I was okay if I didn't stay at her house. She just told me not to.
What if the second when everything seemed picture perfect was actually the second when it all started to crumble? You've probably seen it. Before the quiet wife who holds the family together, the faithful one who never complains, the one who keeps smiling while the cracks spread beneath her feet. And maybe you've even been that person once in your life. But what happens when the silence finally speaks, and it's louder than all the shouting that came before? This isn't another episode of Sister Wives. This is the moment the cameras were supposed to go dark, but the truth just kept rolling. It begins as most unraveling things do, not with an explosion, but with a whisper, an open mic by mistake, a chat never intended for the world to hear, and then a voice familiar, biting, and surprisingly evil, straight out of someone who used to call these women sisters, though now picture yourself being discussed, teased, when you weren't in the room after all those years of sacrifice, loyalty, and keeping your mouth shut. Picture that treachery coming not from a foe, but from a person who sat next to you at the table. Christmas after Christmas for Meri, Janelle, and Christine. It wasn't a moment, it was confirmation. The quiet suspicions they'd harbored for years suddenly exposed. It wasn't their imagination. It wasn't just stress. It wasn't just how family works. The truth had finally come in the door uninvited. And what makes it all the more tragic, they didn't scream, they didn't throw plates, they didn't give us the reality TV blow-up people are used to. Instead, they did something much more powerful. They stood up, they walked away, and they told the truth. You see, this story isn't just about a marriage ending. It's not just about a TV show breaking down. It's about what happens when women stop waiting to be chosen and start choosing themselves. For anyone who's ever slept too long, for anyone who's ever wanted things to be like they were before, for anyone who's ever felt erased in a place they helped create, this one's going to resonate. It's a story about loyalty, identity, and how long you wait before you say enough. There's something painfully relatable about what these women go through, especially if you've ever raised a family, held in your emotions, or felt like the glue that kept everything from falling apart. And now the roles have changed. The women who once stayed silent are finally speaking, and the man who built an entire legacy around their obedience is watching it fall. But here's the surprise. This is not a story of bitterness. It is a story of clarity. So pour a cup of tea, get comfortable, and let's discuss what actually transpired when the limelight died down and the truth wouldn't remain concealed. Because after you listen to what was revealed in that confidential recording, you'll realize this was not the fall of a family. It was the ascendance of the women who withstood it. And that's where our story starts. It actually does look like Cody and Robyn have some sort of scheme, something they've been quietly figuring out for themselves about how to approach this. And believe me, I wouldn't be shocked if Janelle has a plan as well. What we get to see when the cameras are rolling may be only half the story, but here's something about the truth. It doesn't remain secret forever. Behind the scenes of what had seemed like a fairy tale marriage, the cracks were beginning to appear. What had been silence, once considered strength, was beginning to sound rather more like surrender. And at the center of all of that unraveling was a moment no one had anticipated. A secret tape, a shattered illusion, the start of the end of a reality television empire that had been followed by many for years. This is when Sister Wives went from being simply a show and into a full-blown war zone. And all while it was happening, the microphones never stopped recording it. It was wrapping up, the filming was over, the boom mics were stowed away, the lights were shut down, and production vans were leaving the cold sack. All was said to be done, but it wasn't somehow a small mic. One of those clip-on mics hiding under Cody Brown's shirt hadn't been turned off. It was still active, still rolling. What it picked up wasn't intended for anyone outside that room. Cody leaned back on the couch as if he had the burden of the past 20 years on his shoulders. His shirt was half hung out, slumped over from exhaustion. You could practically see the air around him become thicker. He massaged his temples and grumbled into his chest. This entire situation is disgusting. Robyn stood in the doorway, arms folded tightly over her chest. She did not yell. She didn't have to. Her silence was enough. "What did you just say?" she said stiffly. Cody didn't even look up. "Living this way, the pretending, the lies. Me. All of us." His voice was low, but he spoke as if he spat out poison. And that was it. That was when the mask dropped. Robyn stood there. In shock, she literally took a step back, as if the words had physically landed on her. "So you're blaming me now?" She snapped. Cody didn't raise his voice, but his tone cut through the air. "You spin everything around, you cry. You turn things around, and I end up gagging on it." It wasn't anger. It was something else. Something colder. A weary, exhausted truth that only manifests when someone's finally too exhausted to continue lying, and all of it was still being taped, every single word, unadulterated, unfiltered, painfully unplanned. But that wasn't the first time Robyn's own words haunted her. Later that evening, what she believed was in the comfort of her own bedroom, Robyn confided in a producer she respected. She was unaware a backup recorder kept running on a shelf. With an earshot was still rolling tape, her voice shifted. This wasn't the Robyn who was aware of the cameras observing. This time her voice broke with irritation. "He actually blamed me." She wept, and then stopped, her grief turning into something keener. "Janelle's out there playing martyr? Some pioneer woman?" She scoffed. "And Meri, she's some moping Victorian specter." This was not a midnight emotional outburst. It was biting. It was intentional. This iteration of Robyn, foul-tempered and lashing out, was not the person her fans believed they knew. She paced the room, railing about being the sole one still attending, the sole one keeping the family together, the sole one Cody should have stood up for. "They should be thanking me," she growled. "I kept this whole circus from falling apart," she laughed. But not that laughter of joy, no. This laugh was sharp, bitter. The kind designed to mask something which had long soured. That laugh, along with the rest of her rambling late-night speech, was added to what would become on the internet known as Clip 14, do not delete, nobody knows. Precisely how that clip leaked out? No note, no return address. Just a simple envelope holding a flash drive sent discreetly to a retired show editor initially. It was curiosity, but within hours that curdled into shock. By dawn, the complete audio had leaked onto Reddit, and from there it caught fire. This was not speculation anymore. Fans weren't speculating. They were listening to Robyn, unvarnished, unfiltered, ridiculing the very women she once referred to as sisters. The facade was removed, and once people heard it, they couldn't help but hear it. Janelle didn't need to hear the entire thing to get it. She'd lived it. But that moment, hearing Robyn call her a martyr with a complex cut differently, that wasn't on camera, that was Robyn's true voice, the one she reserved for when nobody was supposed to be hearing it, alone in her own kitchen, shaking with her hands. Janelle replayed, and then she too laughed, not at anything funny, but because she was liberated, and finally, after all these years of uncertainty and second-guessing it, all made sense. She knew she'd watched it happen before her very eyes. Cody, piece by piece, falling apart, Robyn inserting herself into his innermost circle, the rest of them being pushed out one little moment at a time. Now everyone could see it too. The reality wasn't just known, it had a voice, and that voice was loud. The cameras were supposed to cut off but fade it. Appears had other plans now. The lights were low, but the truth, it was burning brighter than ever. This was not just another installment of Sister Wives. This was the breakdown of the family's legacy, captured on film by the same individuals responsible for keeping it intact. So now we wonder, was this fate sabotage, or merely the truth that wouldn't stay buried? Let us know. What do you think in the comments? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, because this story, it's not nearly over yet. The repercussions were real. You could sense the harm in the air, but this wasn't merely about love lost or broken hearts. This was about control and what occurs when the fantasy finally utterly breaks even. Robyn, Cody's so-called spirit wife, or whatever, wasn't exempt from his disgust anymore. At the same time, on the other side of state lines, a phone rang. No hello, only one stark question charged with feeling. Have you heard it? Janelle didn't need to ask what it was. She knew. Years of being at odds were finally over. Janelle and Christine were finally on the same page. Both had sacrificed so much, Christine more openly, Janelle more subtly. Both had hoped for far too long that this family they created still had meaning, that all their sacrifices counted. That dream was gone now. Killed. Christine was finished. Finished playing games, finished apologizing, finished sitting back and letting Robyn play the victim and manipulate from behind the scenes. That mask that Robyn had worn had finally slipped, and beneath it Christine saw the truth. This woman had never been one of them. She just pretended long enough to gain power. Meanwhile, in Perowan, Meri gazed down at a typed copy of Robyn's words, not as if she was reading it, but as if she were mourning it, as if those words had been inscribed on a tombstone for years. Meri had kept the hope alive if she remained faithful enough, long enough, perhaps just perhaps. Cody would see her again, but getting told she was a tragic Victorian. Ghost that wasn't cruel, that was a curtain drop, the final one, and deeply humiliating it. Wasn't rage, it wasn't some boisterous loud breakdown, it was smaller than that, clearer something in Meri. Just snapped, not with anger but determination. She finally laid eyes on what it was. She didn't have to continue holding on to a family that had eradicated her quietly. Behind closed doors, what she had to do was walk through that very door and shut it on her way out. Nobody figured the aftermath. It'd make headlines, but it did, and when it did, it shook like a thunderclap over the internet, that raw, in-depth tape. It was uploaded anonymously, but went farther than any TLC promo ever had. Reddit communities blew up. Instagram Reels looped the second. Cody uttered ick about Robyn, all while flashing photos of her wiping away crocodile tears on camera. What had been so meticulously constructed for reality television suddenly became raw and real. This wasn't television anymore. This was reality, gritty and unedited, and the audiences weren't passively observing, they were connecting the dots, pulling receipts. Time-stomping and inundating comment threads with outrage that was personal. The slick scripted veneer had peeled off, and no amount of public relations. Spin could cover it up. Behind closed doors at TLC, there was panic. Executives were conferring. In huddles, lawyers were arguing NDA, terms and possible legal repercussions. But the producers, they saw something different. "This is the story," one exec grumbled. "We don't need a script anymore." At the same time, a former editor reserved in the background came forward and said he was the one who leaked the tape, not for revenge, but out of sheer fatigue. He'd been carrying around too much in his head for too long. The document he'd published wasn't an audio file, it was an act of justice. A reckoning meanwhile back in Flagstaff. Janelle's phone was lighting up her group chat with the kids. It was chaos, texting links, screenshots. Even the little ones, usually protected from the worst of the family badness, were witnessing it now. Gabe, who was normally the quiet one, sent only one message. He really said it. It wasn't because he didn't believe it. It was because he did. Years, decades of being ignored, dismissed, forgotten, and now they had confirmation. Janelle sat on her couch, replaying the clip again on her phone. But she wasn't crying, she wasn't furious, she was serene. Calm, even like a storm had finally passed. Not that it was done, but that the truth had finally fallen, exactly where it needed to fall, out in the open. Meri, in the meantime, read the transcript again, and again. Every sentence weighed on her chest like a stone. She had endured Cody's chill, his distance, his silence that hurt she had grown accustomed to. But to hear Robyn, the woman who had been welcomed into her home with open arms, call her out as a tragic Victorian ghost, that was something different. That was betrayal, intentional and profound. And it wasn't Cody's voice that hurt most, it was Robyn's. Sharp sneering and wrapped in self-righteousness, somehow that cut deeper with Cody. Meri had braced herself for abandonment, but with Robyn, she had hoped for sisterhood, for connection, for a sliver of kindness. Instead, she saw something much worse. Robyn hadn't merely endured her silence. She had flourished under it, constructed her center of power on top of women too. Weary to resist, that was the game, and Meri was finished playing. She sat at her computer, her hands shaking, not out of fear, but out of years of repressing it all. No producers, no crew, just her voice, her truth. It trembled initially, but it didn't shatter. "I'm not a ghost," she breathed, in soft authority, "and I'm not desperate. I was committed, I was deceived, and I lingered too long." She paused, her gaze going beyond the screen into the area once occupied by trust, and in that instant, Meri made a decision. "But I won't keep quiet anymore. You attempted to erase me, but I still exist, I still matter, and in that instant Meri had something she hadn't truly possessed in years. Self, not as wife, not a static scenery in the love affair of someone else, not as the forgotten one, just Meri. And if Robyn believed that, Cody's mic slip was the sole thing to have. been exposed, she was more mistaken than she could possibly have known. The fallout did not remain contained. It bled into every quiet space which had previously concealed the family's cracks, and this time it could not be. Overlooked, Janelle sat at her kitchen counter, her hands shaking a little as she pressed play. She didn't gasp, she didn't cry, the words didn't shock her. If anything, they sounded familiar, like a nightmare she'd been practicing in her head for years. But hearing that venom, Robyn's voice, sharp and smug, still made her stomach turn. Martyr complex, Robyn had sneered. So self-sufficient, but she can't even get Cody to text her back. Janelle didn't blink. Instead, she emitted a quick, harsh laugh, not from amusement, but from relief. After all these years, the fabrication was outed at last, right there on tape. She was always the sensible one, the pragmatic one, the wife who remained stable, while the others danced in drama. She did not fight for attention. She did not plead for attention. She bore the weight of the family in silence, without praise. Meanwhile, Robyn worked the strings backstage. She cried on demand in front of the camera, then pulled strings behind the camera. She took on Cody's emotional support and unobtrusively nudged the other wives into emotional isolation. But now, the stage lights had dimmed, the curtain had dropped, and the audience could finally see what was taking place. Christine's voice over the phone. "Have you heard it?" she asked, her voice tight, raw. "I heard every word," Janelle said, and there was nothing more to say. The games, the manipulation, the illusion of unity, it had all come crashing down. Not by accident, but by Robyn's own words. And for some reason, Janelle did not feel devastated. She felt free. It was as if someone had severed the last thread that had held her to a lovely falsehood. She murmured, as if to herself, it was never about love, it was about control. And now even he, Cody, couldn't abide what Robyn had become. There wasn't any bitterness in her voice, just a sort of peace for the first time in years. She wasn't trying to decipher Cody's moods or considering whether he had even noticed she was alive. She was standing outside the wreckage, not beneath it.
Oh.
And that shifted everything, because once you cease explaining away another's abuse, once you cease shrinking to fit their narrative, you start writing your own. And in that moment, Janelle took up the pen, meanwhile in a small bed and breakfast in Perrin. Meri sat at the window. A crumpled transcript lay beside a half cup of tea. She gazed out the glass, her mind elsewhere. A tragic Victorian ghost. It wasn't a vicious line, it was a razor. A rejection of all that she'd clung to, fought for, held her tongue. About she had endured more mean things in the years leading up to this, from Cody, from anonymous people on the internet, even from herself in the darkest moments, but from Robyn, the one she defended, the one she'd trusted. That hurt went deeper than any of the others she caught. Her breath, not with sorrow, not quite. It was something more biting, hushed, smoldering anger, not the blow-up type, not the flamboyant stuff, just a relentless, smoldering awareness she had been shoved out of the way for years, kept on hand for appearances, put up with but never actually noticed, and yet she'd remained. She appeared, she bit back. She told herself that Robyn was fond of her, that Robyn regarded her as a sister. But now Meri saw it. She was never a sister. She was a placeholder. There until she was no longer useful. Meri opened her laptop, not for business, not for promotion this time. It wasn't for anyone else, it was for her. "I'm not a ghost," Meri said. Her voice was steady, quiet, but deliberate. "And I'm done performing silence." There were no tears, no dramatic walkout. Just the truth, and that finally was enough, because the deepest wound hadn't been delivered by Robyn's words. It was delivered by the fact that, all this time, Meri had still thought she mattered, that her devotion counted, that years of showing up, of hanging on, meant something. But the fantasy was finally gone, and in its wake stood something much more solid. Not revenge, not resentment. Resolve. Meri wasn't going to disappear this time. She wasn't going to be wiped away in Janelle. Her boots struck the pavement with determination. There were no cameras, no TLC crew following behind. Just her and a crumpled copy of the transcript in her breast pocket. There was steel in her eyes. She wasn't going into a battle. She was going into the truth. Robyn had teased her, called her a martyr with an issues complex. But what Robyn never quite got was this: martyrs don't fall apart. They rise. After all that Janelle had been through, raising children, for the most part by herself, Having survived emotional neglect, being the unobtrusive backbone of the family, yet always being nudged to the periphery, now she was being ridiculed by the very person who had benefited most from her muteness. The door groaned open. Robyn stood there, arms crossed, eyes red but hard. Janelle did not see sadness in her face. She saw pity for herself, and that was something Janelle had witnessed more often than she cared to admit. She stepped inside, not waiting to be asked. Meri came along behind her. Serene and silent, they didn't say anything until they sat down at the old wooden table, the same table where they'd gathered for holidays, birthdays, fraught family meetings. But today that table wasn't family today, it was a war zone. Janelle broke the silence. Her voice was crisp, firm, and razor-sharp as glass. You don't get to cry and play victim. While mocking the women who constructed this family, Robyn blinked in surprise. Then Meri had said something, her voice shaking a little, but there was metal beneath. You called me desperate. You thought I wouldn't hear it. Say it to my face now. Robyn attempted to answer, but her normally rehearsed cool had deserted her. She faltered, stuttered, looking for the correct mask to assume, but this time they all failed her. What had ensued wasn't some on-television screaming spree. It wasn't some dramatic TV moment. It was something much stronger, a reckoning. Janelle didn't scream. She didn't need to. Her placidity sliced deeper than rage ever could. She spoke bluntly, declaring the years she'd been benched, the sacrifices she'd made, the sorrow she ingested alone. Robyn attempted to defend herself, but it was clear she wasn't apologetic. She was bare, and for the first time in a long time, nobody was jumping in to save her, because this was no longer a show. This was reality outside the wind. Cut with cold, Meri tugged her shawl closer. Janelle let out a breath. She hadn't even known she'd been holding. No apologies were made, no hugs, no vows to mend what had been broken, but something had changed, something significant. There was a silent release of freedom for the first time in years. They weren't seeking Cody's validation. They weren't reorganizing themselves to conform to a family system that never really accommodated them. And they weren't acting out roles in a production that had long since lost its significance. They had finally expressed themselves, not merely to Robyn, but to themselves, and within that home. Robyn slumped over the table. Her tears fell not out of pity, not out of show, but out of a sort of disbelief, because in the silence that came after, she knew the power was no longer hers. She was left with her own words, words she never supposed anyone else would ever hear, words that had once given her control, now constricted around her like chains. There was no spinning this knot. This time her husband had heard it. He overheard her deriding the very women he had once pledged were his spiritual equals. And the worst part, he didn't stand up for her. Not exactly, not any more. Miles away, Cody replayed the recording. Again, he did not say a word. No indignation, no apologies, only a slow, bitter quiet. The kind that creeps in when a man understands that the empire he had created, an empire sustained by emotional manipulation and deliberate quiet, had finally dissolved. Not by outside forces, but by the people within. The wives weren't joining forces against him. They were merely departing silently. Deliberately, they were rewriting the narrative without him. Cody hadn't lost only marriages or a TV show. He lost the delusion of control. Janelle and Meri did not look back. As they headed out to their cars, too long, their power had remained locked behind closed mouths and forced grins. It had existed beneath years of concession, of waiting to be selected. But now, in the wake of betrayal, they stood tall, not because they were fixed, because they were honest at last. They weren't wives any longer. They were witnesses, survivors, and they weren't seeking a seat at the table any longer. They were turning the entire thing over. The aftermath didn't come with fireworks. It came with silence, a peace neither of them had known in years. For Robyn, it was the quiet echo of her own breathing within a home that once vibrated with family life. The walls did not buzz with laughter or chaos anymore, only silence. Her phone remained motionless. No text from the producers, no group messages from the other wives, no invites, no updates, no holidays. Only silence. The loneliness had finally caught up to her. For years, she had spun herself into the hub of a world bound together by borrowed love and practiced charm, but even the brightest stars plummet when gravity gives way. In Cody's silence, that was gravity lost. He hadn't abandoned her, but something had. The pedestal she stood upon had cracked, and there was nothing to support her now. She recalled his words. Plain but final, my defense of you is over. Not rejection, detachment, something colder, something more difficult to recover from the man who used to break. All the rules of their family to accommodate her now couldn't even look her in the eye, and that frightened her more than Meri or Janelle ever had in Parowan. Meri came back to her little bed and breakfast, not victorious, not even serene, just altered. She filled herself a cup of tea, let it sit a while, let it go cold, but this time she didn't wait for someone to share it with. She drank it alone. Janelle also went home and discovered another sort of silence, not the empty, lonely one, but the kind that envelops you when you're finally by yourself with your decisions and don't regret them. Her phone was ringing with texts from the kids, memes, jokes, love. She laughed, truly laughed, and for the first time in a very long time, that small pleasure. It was enough online, the clip continued, spreading Reddit, Instagram, YouTube. But to the women who lived it, viral fame didn't come into play. The true power wasn't in the leak. It was in what followed. They hadn't simply outed Robyn, they had taken back their voices, and Cody, he hadn't so much lost his hold. He finally realized what that grip had caused, and somewhere deep within that reckoning, perhaps, just perhaps, the healing could